He never pulled a trigger. He never held a weapon. Yet in 1969, a single man convinced a group of ordinary young people to commit acts that would forever alter American history, using nothing but words. This is not a story about evil. This is a story about psychology, manipulation, and a system that failed at every single turn. To understand Charles Manson, you must first understand the world that created him. Born in November 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, Manson entered the world under circumstances that many child psychologists today would flag as catastrophically high risk. His mother, Kathleen Maddox, was a teenage girl with no stable home and no means of support. His biological father was largely absent. By the time Charles was 5 years old, his mother had been sentenced to prison for armed robbery, and Charles was passed between relatives, like an inconvenience nobody wanted to keep. Researchers studying adverse childhood experiences, what scientists now call ACEs, have documented that children who face abandonment, parental incarceration, and institutional placement before the age of 10 show measurably altered brain development in regions governing empathy, trust, and emotional regulation. Charles Manson was placed in a boys' school in Indiana by age 9. He escaped and was caught. By the time Manson was released from Terminal Island Federal Prison in 1967, at age 32, he had spent 17 of his 32 years behind bars. But he had not been idle. He absorbed influence psychology, studied persuasive communication techniques, practiced guitar and storytelling in front of captive prison audiences. When he walked into the Summer of Love, 1967 San Francisco, he stepped into a perfect storm. Haight-Ashbury was filled with young runaways and searching souls rejected by mainstream society. Manson identified vulnerable individuals, predominantly young women who had experienced family rejection or broken relationships, and offered exactly what they were missing: unconditional acceptance and a charismatic father figure. Psychologists studying coercive control today describe the pattern Manson used as a textbook example of love bombing, an overwhelming affection designed to dissolve independent judgment before gradually replacing it with the manipulative. Here is the chapter most true crime coverage ignores, and it may be the most psychologically revealing part of this entire story. In 1968, Charles Manson came extraordinarily close to becoming a signed recording artist. Through commune connections, Manson was introduced to a prominent music producer who visited the ranch and listened to him perform. The producer ultimately declined. But what historians and psychologists have since noted is the catastrophic psychological effect this rejection had on Manson. For a man whose entire identity was constructed around being exceptional, around being chosen, this was not merely a professional setback. It was a confirmation of every rejection he had experienced since childhood. Forensic psychologists who have studied cult leaders describe this pattern as narcissistic injury. When a person with fragile, grandiose self-perception is rejected, the resulting rage is directed outward, at the world that refused to recognize their greatness. In August 1969, a series of homicides in Los Angeles sent shockwaves through California. The LAPD initially struggled to connect the events, a failure that became significant institutional critique. The breakthrough came from informant testimony and a chance arrest at the ranch on unrelated charges. It was during that arrest that investigators first assembled the larger picture. Lead prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi described the challenge as unlike anything he had encountered. The central legal difficulty: prosecuting a man who had not personally committed the crimes, but who had directed others through psychological influence. This was legally uncharted territory. Prosecutors had to build an argument around vicarious liability, criminal responsibility for acts you cause others to commit. The trial began in June 1970 and ran 9 months, the longest, most expensive criminal trial in American history at the time. Over 150 witnesses testified. In January 1971, Manson was sentenced to death. It appeared to be the end of the story. It was not. In February 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled the state's death penalty unconstitutional. All death sentences were automatically commuted to life imprisonment, including Manson's. Manson appeared before the parole board 12 times between 1978 and 2012. Each time, parole was denied. He died in prison in November 2017 at the age of 83. But the more compelling story belongs to the followers. Leslie Van Houten, one of the women convicted, became a documented model of rehabilitation. She earned college degrees in prison, counseled other inmates, and was repeatedly recommended for parole by the board, only to be blocked by successive California governors. Her case forced a profound legal and ethical debate. What is the purpose of incarceration? If rehabilitation is a genuine goal of the justice system, what happens when a demonstrably rehabilitated person is denied freedom? The legacy of this case extends far beyond the individuals involved, and it continues to shape American law, psychology, and culture today. In legal terms, it established critical precedents around conspiracy and criminal direction. The concept that a person bears legal responsibility for crimes committed by others under their psychological influence became a clearly defined principle in California law and influenced prosecutorial strategy nationwide. In psychology, the case became one of the foundational studies in cult dynamics, coercive control, and radicalization. Academic forensic psychology programs use it to teach how charismatic individuals build insular communities, dismantle critical thinking, and create what researchers call thought-terminating cliches, simple repeated phrases that replace complex moral reasoning. The case also ignited California's prison reform debate for decades. The question is still unresolved. When rehabilitation is real and documented,